I'm the driver, but I feel as though I believe in encoded path. I wasn't somebody who thought about feelings or thought about psychological processes. I think our life's work is to find out what's in us wanting to be excavated. It's not about mastering or perfecting or dissociating into singular threads of consciousness, like being a master meditator and every other part of your life is a shit show. It's about trying to get every part of your life in alignment.
So welcome everyone to the new episode of the Bridging Podcast. I am here together with Jeff Brown, and I would really like to introduce him. Jeff is now an author, teacher, entrepreneur, and a grounded spiritualist. I can't even pronounce it, but he was actually a young boy with a burning hunger for self-discovery. He living in Toronto, Canada. His young adult years were spent chasing that which is successful in the eyes of the world. He studied law, graduated, and worked with a famous lawyer. One day, his sacred purpose called him in another direction. Suddenly, on the verge of opening his own law practice, Jeff heard a little voice inside telling him to stop. Just stop. Well, some confusion and fighting this voice, he surrendered to it and explored different paths. He studied bioenergetics, practiced as a body-centered psychotherapist, completed a master in psychology, and co-founded the Open Heart Gang. He started his own business and became a successful entrepreneur. The challenges he faced and the countless steps of overcoming were intended for this purpose: to support humanity in their efforts to embody all that they are. He's the author of several books, and one book that I am truly in love with is Hearticulations. For people that will watch this on YouTube, here is the book, Hearticulations. It reminds me of my heart. It reminds me of our hearts. It reminds me that we are all connected and that we are all from the same source. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. You're from Turkey, I think you told me.
Yeah, my parents are originally from Turkey. I was born and raised in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a lot in Soul Shaping about my adventures in Turkey in a place called Kaş. And Turkey played a profound role in my moving away from the legal path and the direction of, well, for many years, just exploring myself before moving in the direction of writing. So I have very, very fond memories of Turkey.
This is so extraordinary because one of my favorite places is Kaş, Turkey. I go there for scuba diving every year.
So what a magical place Kaş is. I imagine it's busier or more touristed than when I went there. It wasn't so overwhelming at the time. I bought Turkish rugs there, and I felt like I had one of my first experiences driving into Kaş on the bus and in Kaş itself, of some kind of notion of past lives or some awareness of an archetypal current that was flowing through my life. I want to go back there. For me, it was a very expansive place.
When was this, Jeff? Which year?
Probably before you were born. Well, maybe, yes, probably. I think it was 1993. It was right after I articled in criminal law in Canada and then went away for the summer before coming back to do the final phase of our bar admission course at that time. And by the time I came back there were all kinds of serendipitous things happened. And by the time I came back from my 3 or 4 weeks in Turkey and Greece, I was a different person. You know, I had a more expansive lens on me and all of this. And if not for that trip, I probably would have made a mistake and gone deeply into the legal portal, and may never have gotten out, you know. So Turkey was instrumental in my own transformation. Yeah.
I feel so strongly at this moment that everything actually is so connected, because I go to Kaş a lot when I want to connect to my heart. I'm like, hey, now I want to just take a step back not only enjoy the sun and water, be quiet, and really connect to myself. And before we just started this conversation here, I didn't even know that. And you're just telling me now, Kash. And so it's all around again. And Jeff, I tried to introduce you, but I would like to ask you, like, when people ask you, who are you, Jeff? Who is Jeff Brown? How do you introduce yourself?
I'm not really sort of egoically attached to any of these descriptions. I never like writing my bio. I sometimes say that I like to write things, but I don't really have a consistent description of myself nowadays when I encounter people, usually through whatever connection I'm meeting with, they kind of know something about what I've been doing. I just don't, I don't see myself in some fixed form or something. I feel like once I started to get on the sacred purpose path or train or something, I experienced myself kind of like a car on a highway that comes to the next exit, and the exit tells me what sort of my next thing on my path is, and I get off and I do the thing, and then I get back on and do the thing. And so it feels like it's within myself evolutionary. It just keeps transforming and changing. And for the last, 20 plus years, I've had a pretty clear idea from moment to moment what the next thing is that I'm supposed to do. So it's not a fixed definitional process. I think when you're alive to transformation and you're alive to a movement towards something we might call wholeness, what I used to call the soul shaping journey. I think it's like that.
Does it mean you are also actually, you are continuously a driver on the highway, or do you stop sometimes?
Yeah, I think the dance between willfulness and surrender on this journey is a very important and interesting one. I think if you're too willful, you'll miss the exit, and if you're just moving too quickly, and if you're too surrendered, you'll also miss the exit because you won't have any sort of energetic impetus to arrive at the next place. So I think I'm the driver, but I feel as though I believe in encoded path. I believe that below all these sort of survivalist, practical ways we define ourselves in order to survive, and we have to survive, that I believe, at least for me, and I can't imagine it's only me, I believe it's got to be everybody, that there is an encoded what I broadly call sacred purpose, callings, gifts, offerings inside of each of us, that if we can bust through all the misidentifications and malconditioning and get out of practical functioning only, which for many people economically isn't possible, there is something else living inside of us that wants to be, manifest or expressed or live through or something like that. And I just believe that, and because I lived it. I saw glimpses of encoded paths throughout my early life, even in my crazy family, even in the very practical. And I was an edgy, practical, feisty guy. I wasn't somebody who thought about feelings or thought about psychological processes, but there were still indicators of path throughout my life. Like I would see this guy on TV who was this famous criminal lawyer, Eddie Greenspan, and I would say, I kind of know that guy, and I feel like I'm going to work with that guy one day. And then I did. So it felt really real for me. So where does that come from? I don't believe it comes from my channeling the divine or something. I believe that it was in me. It's in me. And I think our life's work is to find out what's in us wanting to be excavated and actualized. And it's difficult because there's so much misidentification. We're culturally deliberately pushed into overstimulation and misidentification so we can be played and manipulated economically and politically and religiously and spiritually. And so there's a lot of stuff to clear through, a lot of trauma to heal, to create space inside to be able to glimpse the path that is you. Mm-hmm. And I think my work in my life now is to try to simply remind people of that.
Yeah. And you write in one of your pieces. If you want to live a more spiritual life, live a more human life, be more truly, fiercely, and heartfully human. You as Jeff Brown, how are you more truly, fiercely, heartfully human? How do you practice that?
How do you practice humanness? Well, so for me, where my journey arrived, at this notion of enrealment, and turning upside down patriarchal spirituality, naming it, defining it, New Cage, all that stuff. There was a split in the so-called spiritual world between humanness and spirituality. That's the game. Mm-hmm. That's why they can get away with all kinds of crazy behavior, because they just call that their humanness, but that's not their true essence. I don't buy any of that. So for me, I came to realize that the more in my body, grounded, heart-centered, integrated, present for all aspects of my life, mm-hmm. not just the stuff that feels good and easy and masterful. To me, that's spirituality. It's not about mastering or perfecting or dissociating into singular threads of consciousness, like being a master meditator and every other part of your life is a shit show. It's about trying to get every part of your life in alignment with every other part of your life. So I think that's just a moment-to-moment practice for me, to
being grounded, heart-centered, and being present.
Embodied, yes, but through the body, not as a cerebral construct, not as a master meditator witnessing my experience. That's a part of the journey. Enrealment encompasses everything, but really living more primarily from a dropped-in felt experience. I'm more interested in feeling than thinking. I'm not particularly into knowledge or so-called knowledge-based wisdom. I prefer intuition and body-centered stuff. And so I think for me, if you're not in your body, if you're not experiencing presence as a whole being experience, you're not really here.
Yeah.
So then you're having a notion of here-ness or now-ness or awakening that in some ways is conveniently dissociated from your humanness. And it never made sense to me that awakening would be dissociated from my humanness, because if I'm not awakening my humanness, there's nothing to awaken.
Yeah. And how can we as human beings be more in our body, especially in these times, which you also said, we are in a fast-paced environment. If we live in more in the Western world too, and maybe also in the Eastern, everything goes very, very fast. And spirituality became also like a commercial business in some parts of the world. And then saying being more in your body and feeling through your body, the heart-centered place, the humanness in you. And maybe you don't need to practice it. You only need to feel it. And when you feel, and how can we be in these times that we live in now be more in our bodies?
I think it's helpful to do something in the way of grounding practices. Like I was really into bioenergetics, Alexander Lowen's work, because he always began session work with basic grounding practices, and that's easy to find online. Bioenergetic grounding, whatever it is that grounds you and drops you down into your body. And I think the reason why psychotherapeutically now there's a strong movement towards somatic or body-centered psychotherapies is because we were finding talk therapy helpful sometimes, mm-hmm. but not ultimately embodying. Mm-hmm. In fact, a perfect way to avoid embodiment mm-hmm. sometimes, right? Excessive analysis perpetuates emotional paralysis. So I think it's good if you can afford to engage in somatic psychotherapeutic practice, to work on whatever trauma you're holding individually and from your generational lineage, your ancestral lineage. I think breath work is wonderful, holotropic breath work. I can't remember the guy I think he's a Norwegian guy that people love doing morning breath work with him. I can't remember his name. So I think those kinds of practices are very helpful. And I just think it's important. I use the term solitude in soul shaping because for me, it was very important to be able to create separateness from the culture, a culture that is often organized around trying to distract me. Consumerism preys on the uncentered. So mm-hmm. what do you need to do to recenter yourself? For me, it had to do with emotional clearing, for sure. But it also had to do with separating myself for periods of time from the culture itself, regaining a connection to my center before reconnecting with the culture. I don't do as much of that now because I think that I found my calling and my path and in my body, and it's so alive in me that I can withstand the culture now. But years ago, I had to leave the culture often, go into nature a lot in order to just hear myself and feel myself and know myself before reconnecting with the world. Depends on your level of sensitivity, your level of consciousness, and how much material you're holding.
So for people that, if this topic is very new for the listener now, I would like to ask a question that kind of simplifies it. I don't know if that is possible to make it a little bit more understandable for people that might think, what are you talking right now about? Like, thinking versus feeling. And like, for example, if you go to talk therapy, you might talk through, like, I have been emotionally abused when I was a child. You might know it with the mind, with your thinking. This is what I felt sad, I felt this. But it is important. Are we saying that it is important that you feel in your body all these feelings, that you need to actually release all these feelings in you out by feeling through it? Is this what you just meant to say? Or?
Great question. So I think there's a place for everything. But if the goal for me, let's say, is presence as defined as a whole being experience, then just talking about intellectually interpreting experience can be very helpful and also connects to the body. I mean, you say something, you own something, you speak a truth, a therapist reflects it back to you, and then you feel the feeling in your body that you're heard and seen. So it is not just separate from the body. But the body-centered psychotherapies like bioenergetics really believe that the emotional holdings, the old pain, the old traumas, the memories of these experiences are held somatically within parts of the body. And the exercises, for example, in bioenergetics and also in somatic experiencing, Peter Levine's work, are, I think, designed to connect us to those feelings, to those memories, and to create pathways for attuning to, releasing, and expressing them. So for me, I was more inclined in the direction of the very energized stuff like bioenergetics because I was very energized. And breath work as well, Stan Grof's holotropic breath work. So talking about my mother was so helpful for a while.
Yes.
But then I needed to go in my body and I needed to smash a cube, or with Al Lowen, twist a red towel. I remember Al Lowen said to me, here's a red towel, kill your mother. I want you to kill your mother. And I was like, kill my mother. And I had these feelings like, well, my mommy's going to know I'm killing my mother. My mother was alive. So, but he said, no, just kill your mother. Here's the fucking towel and kill your mother. So twist the, so that thing, as terrifyingly uncomfortable as it was a part of me felt this kind of anger and rage that needed to move out of me. So that experience did more to change me and prepare me to move forward in my life than anything that I talked about for 15 years in talk-based therapy. That's it.
Yeah, so it's a way of really releasing all the emotions that are attached.
And connecting, yes, but also connecting to the memory of experience that when you're talking about it, you can't, because it's held in the body. So for example, somebody might have shallowed their breath at a very early age because then they don't feel all the pain of the environment and their traumas. So once they start to energize and enliven their breath again, all these, a whole series of feelings and memories come to the surface that now you can figure out what to do to attend to them. Sometimes just to connect to them. Sometimes there's something that needs to be expressed. Sometimes there's something that needs to be released. If you hover above the experience of expanding and enlivening the breath, and you and I just sit here and talk about my mommy, then I could spend 1,000 years doing it and never know what I'm holding.
Yeah.
But once you go, I went over Alexander Lowen had a breathing stool. It's one of the bioenergetic pieces of equipment. And just going back over that and him pushing me to feel and to hear a whole flood of old memories and feelings that I needed to connect to rose into awareness that never would have rose into awareness through a talk-based model. Now, you have to be ready for body-centered work. If somebody's a very severe trauma survivor, sometimes they don't want to go anywhere near their body, and you have to respect that. But if you can, it's helpful in your therapeutic process to drop down into the trauma tunnels. They're held here.
Yeah. You know, I would like to share an experience. I've been 3 times to one of to retreat of Dr. Joe Dispenza, and there are tons of other retreats. And there also in the meditations I was doing, you know, it was 7-day process, and the first 2 days I was just sitting there, and the third day I just got kind of fearful. I was like, what's happening? My body started shaking, and I was like, am I doing this? I felt like I'm childish. I'm just shaking my body, but I was doing nothing. My body started shaking. It just became more and more and more and more. And the more it happened, at the end of the meditations of the day, I felt so much relieved and relaxed. And there was the first time I experienced it through my body, because I was much more in my head with many things. Oh, this happened, that happened. But knowing it, but really feeling through my body and releasing never had happened. I don't want to say another person, but my personality became a little different than before. There's
it's like an adapted consciousness, right?
Yeah, can be, if you want to call it like that. Yeah. Okay. Wow. This is super, super interesting. Also really deep, Jeff. You say in one of your interviews, every human being is a realm of possibilities. Every human being that I have ever encountered carries an extraordinary degree of uniqueness, a sacred purpose, a calling, and offering. And sometimes that they are here to bring in this world. But if we hate ourselves, it is very hard for us to activate that. And my question is actually has 2 sides. The first one is, why do human beings actually sometimes hate themselves? What is the reason for that? And then how do we actually stop hating and really keep moving forward toward the direction that we are bringing our calling, our voice in the world, which is meant exactly for us? You know, that's kind of calling.
Wow. So part 1, self-hatred. I think self-hatred is internalized from family of origin, of course. And I think also from the culture. You know, I think if we value ourselves too much, we're not as easy to control in the economic world, because we don't need so much from the economic world anymore. We're more self-gratified. And also in the spiritual world, where the patriarchal traditions emphasize the dissolution of the ego as a step towards greater awakening. So how confusing is this? You go into the psychotherapist's office and you work on building a healthy sense of self so that you can live the life that you're born to live. You walk out into the culture, and in various ways, the culture is designed to keep you down, to keep you shriveled up and smaller. Your family of origin may be communicating all kinds of abusive or neglectful messaging, or direct messaging, like when you are too full of yourself, you're too big for your britches. There were all kinds of sayings that were designed, and they may have had a good intention, so we didn't draw too much negative attention to ourselves in the world, but they also had the effect of confusing us so that we're not sure if we're supposed to feel good about ourselves, if it's unhealthily egoic to feel good about ourselves. And then this bullshit spiritual world shows up and says you have to dissolve the ego in order to become an enlightened being. So
yes, dissolve the ego.
We're all mixed up. We're all just mixed up. And I think there is a place for the healthy self-concept. My work in my life was to build my healthy self concepts. So I could accomplish things. And by accomplishing them, I proved to myself that I have ability. Affirmations are helpful, but I think if they're not coupled with actual self-restoring action, they don't mean very much. So, every time I pushed myself to the next level of manifestation in my life, I affirmed my value. I think doing the healing work and the release work, and particularly the anger expression work, is a way of restoring your sense of self, because when you grant yourself permission to own that which you are angry about, and through the body express and release it, you are sending a message, I think, to your inner child or to your core self, that you have intrinsic value, that you matter enough to be able to stand down aggression. You matter enough to find your voice. In bioenergetics, Lowen talked a lot about self-possession, being healthily boundary, knowing where you end and the other beginning, being energized, being alive, and essentially being spirited through the body, which I think is fundamentally the experience of knowing the self as a strong and sturdy and healthily egoic organism. And recognizing that we're up against it culturally, because for all the reasons I described. So for me, the release work was important. Standing my ground relationally was important. Letting my parents know how I felt about their behavior was important. Doing work in the world to prove to myself that I had worth and that I had impact, efficacy was important. And I think at this stage of human development, this building of the healthy ego and releasing of the old material is sacred purpose for most of us right now. This is where we are. And it's almost very difficult to get to the calling for the world piece until you've done some of that work, because there's so much self-hatred and so much in the way of diminished energy in the way of it. So standing your ground, finding your voice, doing your thing in the world continues to develop and build you to the stage where you feel like you can do anything. Yeah.
So is there in our lives a turning point, Jeff, where we strongly feel maybe pain, maybe like this hurts so much, I'm doing this, I'm actually being a lawyer, or I'm being a whatever, anyone else, but this is not where I am meant to do for at this moment? Like, what is the turning point there that we actually really start living this is my calling? I need to feel grounded here. I need to put my voice out here. I recently had a talk with an artist, which is a beautiful singer. And she told me the story in her childhood, like the parents were all into like security work. You need to, be a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher. So you get a really stable income. But she has still fire and music inside of her that she wants to be a singer. She wants to put her voice out there, but she's so conditioned when she was a child of having security. And now, the parents don't say anything anymore about that, but it's still conditioned in her body. Like, does she need to wait for a turning point, or when is the right time to take the action? How does this process happen? Difficult question.
I think it's different for everybody. I think that, I had, and I wrote about this, and Soul Shaping is about this, I had an awareness of other pathways of possibility at an early age. A lot of people don't have that. All they have is conditioned practicality and survivalism. And then, or they don't. They know they want to be an artist, but their parents are pragmatists and they're economically pushed in the direction of survivalism. So I use the term truth aches, not toothaches, because I think there are indicators within you of your malaise or your depression or your frustration with walking a path that isn't your own. Problem is that the whole culture is in a survivalist, for the most part, most of the world is in a survivalist reality, in fact, where they really do need to make a practical decision so they can survive. This movement towards authenticity, this bridge crossing we're engaged in, where we don't choose our vocation based on practicality, but we choose it based on our calling, is a very long, slow cultural collective movement. For some reason, some of us just can't live without our calling, and others can. And yes. And some people can't engage their calling because they have no other choice but to put food on the table in the most practical way possible in their economic circumstances. Economics plays a bigger role in all of this than anything does. If we created a world where everybody somehow knew that they would be able to get food on the table one way or the other, more people would be willing to explore the thing that calls them rather than the practical steps that they're taking. And this is a very complicated thing. For me, luckily, I had enough energy, and you need energy, to work sort of full time in a window business and then write from 9 p.m. till 3 a.m. and energize the calling. The problem is a lot of people who've been trapped in survivalist realities for too long, they don't have that energy. So it's all they can do to get through their day and come home. So you have to want it really bad. You have to be willing to explore it. It's very bold and brave, especially if you're living in a very economically difficult set of circumstances. But I think it's ultimately the thing that will save us, because I think so much of the reactivity, the insanity that we see in the species comes from people not doing sacred purpose. Because when you do sacred purpose, even as it changes and unfolds, as you deepen, grow, and expand, you don't feel frustrated. You don't feel as angry. And it becomes like a buffer or a protective energy around you, so you can withstand the nonsense of the world because you have this beautiful thing to come home to. But getting there is not for many of us, this is not a simple thing. Because really, primarily because of the conditioning around pragmatism, which often was true. And I know, so for example, me as a Jew, growing up as a poor Jew, the idea that I would go through the whole legal process, become a lawyer who did a big murder trial, had good friends in policing now because of the trial. In other words, I was perfectly positioned to become very quickly a prominent criminal trial lawyer. For me to walk away from that was insane, would be seen as insane. But I figure if I could do it, other people can do it, because I had so much anxiety back then around security issues that it was so difficult. And so the way I did it is I went and got a practical window business and made enough of a living, and then went off and explored myself. And if you have the energy to do that, do that. But if somebody gets married young, has a bunch of kids, it's very complicated.
You need to put some more bread loaves on the table. You need to pay the rent, the mortgage, and maybe there's not a mortgage, but you need to pay just the rent, the gas, electric, water.
Yeah.
And let's say, Jeff, someone does that way, works just 9 to 5, and maybe in a job that she or he does not like, but it needs to be done. And another person says hey, I'm going to be a singer. I know it's difficult, but I'm just going to do it. This is my calling. Both, and there are much more all in between, of course. Your book is called Hearticulations. How do we all, in the moment we are living, whatever we do, it doesn't matter for now, how do we live and move from the heart?
Well, I think it's helpful to emphasize or prioritize clearing the emotional debris that's obstructing your heart. Cleaning. Creating space inside for feeling. And some of that has to do with stuff you're holding from the past that needs to move through. Some of it has to do with the armor emotionally and physically that you've put on to deal with your environment. Sometimes you need to change your environment so you can feel safe enough to move down into the heart and to shed the armor. It's a complicated thing in a world where, I like to think that the ultimate world would be where there's still a need to armor your consciousness, but it's a conscious process. So you're not unknowingly and automatically and unconsciously emotionally armoring yourself, as an adult at least, but you're knowing the difference between an open and articulated state, let's say, and a more armored state. And then you look at various situations, like let's say you're going to a family gathering and you can't stand your family, but you feel like you have to go. So you make the decision. You look in the mirror and you say, I'm going to put on some armor today because I don't want to feel all this needless discomfort. And then you go, and when you come home, you look in the mirror and you go, I'm safe now. I can drop back down into my heart, put on your music, connect to yourself. So I think it's just, the first step is just like become conscious of the difference between open and closed, and then ask yourself when you should close or tighten or tense, and then remember to come back home to your heart as soon as you have a chance.
Being conscious, aware of when you're armored and when you are open.
Yeah, because it's not all or nothing. Sometimes you need to have more armor in this world. That's just reality.
So it is actually also situational, but you can decide to be situational. But there will be a lot of people, I think, in the world, they are not even aware when they are closed or when they are open. You know, it just happens.
Happening automatically. It's a pattern that began in childhood as a survival coping strategy. That's the thing about our armoring habits. They served a purpose, but we don't pay attention to when they've worn out their welcome as patterns. They just become who we are and how we function. So we have to have a curiosity, or develop a curiosity about who we really are versus how we manifest. This thinking about it. And this was one of the points of focus in my 20s for whatever reason. Even in my teen years, I was naming my adaptations, Hyperboy and Captain America and Encyclopedia Brown. And I was asking the question, who am I really? Are these parts me, or are these just ways I function in this crazy world? Now, most people don't think like this. They're beginning to more now, like Dick Schwartz's internal family systems work, talking about parts, making a conversation about parts, a normalized conversation, is a very important step, because your parts are real, but there may often be, or often is, something, a core self that's more fundamentally intrinsic to who you are, that you want to connect with, so you're not over-identified with the parts and the adaptations, disguises, and defenses that get you through the day.
I would like to give an example. When I have a lot, I give courses about transformation and growth. And when I have a lot of paperwork or digital work I need to do without any people around me, like Excel or making slides and all. And sometimes I work with people in the same room, but I'm just busy with my own thing. And let's say someone says hey, and I can just be very direct, hey, I'm busy. I can be rude even sometimes. I'm just so focused, and I got later on in my life aware of it's not actually me. I'm kind of a machine, I experience, that is doing the job, wants to have the task done. And then, my friends in my social life, and I tell them this, they're like, but you're actually normally kind. You're open. You're loving. I'm like, no, but when I do this Excel, when I do the presentation, I'm just like a machine. And I'm just like, don't disturb me. I'm busy. And I can feel like it's from a stress or fear that I won't finish it, that I won't make this happen. Yeah. I'm just reacting as a manic almost person,
So in that situation, your work might be to use presentation as like a laboratory for your own expansion, to try to move in the direction of doing it while staying a little closer to your heart. A little bit here and there, just to see. And it may be that it's a job where that doesn't work with the function. It may just be that you can't be that close to your heart. I'll give an example. When I was in an apprenticeship, or articling in Canada, we call it, for criminal law, when I went into court and I was the student and there was the prominent lawyer and I was writing cross examinations, I was an edgy guy. I was in the vigilance. We were at war. I mean, it was a 4-month trial. But then I went to the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck and did some breath work and various things. And I came way more surrendered, like way more feeling in my heart. And then I thought, I just want to be sure about leaving law. Am I sure I want to leave law? So I, rented some space from a buddy of mine, and I went into court the first time, and I was still in this, holding on to this feeling of being in my heart. It just felt so, I loved it, and I was like, I can't fucking do this here. This is ridiculous. I'm going to be the worst lawyer in Canada if now, that doesn't mean there aren't times with a jury or in an examination of a witness where you can come in soft, for sure. But I had to be vigilant in that environment, and it did not serve me to be so tenderly and receptively in a surrendered state in my heart. So it depends partly on the function, but if you're doing it in places where you don't need to do it, then that's something you'd want to be aware of.
And let's say if I would like to be more heart-centered or more open, I can eventually also decide I'm not going to do this, because when I am doing this, I am actually having more armor. If I have the possibility also from an economic perspective, I can say, this is nothing for me. I need to be more out there, talk to people. When I'm more open, my heart is open, and help people. Okay.
I mean, I'll put it to you this way. When most people win the lottery, they don't go and choose a job that requires them to be unrelaxed. They usually, if they're going to work, choose a job where they can stay relaxed.
Yes.
Because it feels better to be relaxed.
Nice one. Cool. Okay. So on page 11 of Hearticulations, you write, the story changes when we own our pain. Either we work through our story, or our story will work through us. So, or we work through our story, or our story will work through us. So let's say your story is very painful for you, and you have put this armor around you. How do we still work through our story when it is painful?
Well, ideally, you do it with a qualified therapist that you feel safe with. And of course, it depends on how much material there is and how deeply painful the material is. And you want to engage that process when you're ready for it. You don't want to come in too hard and fast, because that could be re-traumatizing and not so easily integrated. But, you find, if you can, someone to work with. If you can't afford that, people around you that can support your process. There's all kinds of stuff online in terms of techniques to find your way into your body and into those feelings, and, do your best to move it on through, or to make sense of it, or to garner the insights that live at the heart of it. Depends what it is. I mean, not everything is about release. Sometimes it's just about attunement, connection, on making sense of it, understanding how it's affected the way you've lived your life and the way you've moved through the world. There's a lot of levels to the reclamation of the material and to the interpretation of the material. But, when you're ready, create space to get in there slowly, surely, methodically, and determinedly, if you feel like you're up for it.
So you actually need to be ready for it, first of all.
Well, I think it's important. I think there's a reason I did talk therapy for years before I was ready to engage my body more deeply. I think partly I wasn't ready, and sometimes it's circumstantial. Again, I'm back to the things we're talking about. If you're having to push your way through some practical, annoying job all the time in order to feed your kids, it's difficult to create space for deep traumatic excavation work, because you don't have space to be with the feelings. You don't have time or space to integrate them. So there's a lot of factors. I consciously and deliberately created space to engage my process. Not that you ever engage your whole process, but I really prioritized it. I had this idea in my mind, I guess in my body, at a pretty early age, that the more work I did in those places, the better my life would be later. And not everybody feels that way in Western culture. People want to do 5 or 6 sessions and then they want to get back into the world. And I just saw this as a lifelong transformational process, not just because there was so much trauma inside of me, but also because I was in a world. I mean, Alexander Lowen used to do 300 tantruming kicks every morning, even as an elderly man, not just because of his old material needing to be cleared, but also because of the culture that we live in, which denies the animal body, denies the sensual body, denies the feeling body, keeps us trapped in our head tripping inside of our minds all the time, or trapped in a spiritual construct that has us trapped in our heads, blaming the mind, witnessing the mind, but never dropping down into the body, because patriarchal spirituality doesn't want to go near the body. So everywhere we go, we're set up to avoid this material. So you want to develop practices in your life that continue sometimes to force you back inside of your body, and then to figure out how to function in your body with the rest of the world, which is, I think, what we're talking about, the challenges of being in your heart and being in a mind-centered world.
Yeah. For me, like what is important and what really also helped me for the past 8 years, I've been actually more involved in the practicality of personal growth and spirituality. I knew it before, from theory. I read many books because I also studied child psychology. I read many books, but I didn't know it. And for me, going at least twice a year to different courses or retreats where I really am back in my body helps me to connect to myself, to just feel my heart, and to kind of also release a lot of things that I don't want to hold on to anymore, and which is really not easy. But I felt at the beginning like, hey, maybe it's too much. I go twice a year, but I felt so much I really need it, and I made it my priority. Like, this is my spending money is to that, and not, for example, to expensive stuff or whatever. That helps me. I want to ask another question about self-love and being selfish. You write a lot about loving yourself in the book. We set the stage for real love when we learn how to love ourselves enough to protect ourselves from harm. That's what you write on page 22. What is actually the difference for you between self-love and being selfish?
It's funny you say this, because one of my worst quotes, one of my cheesiest quotes that I wrote years ago was, "It's not selfish to love the self, it's self-kiss."
Can you repeat that?
It's just a terrible quote. It's not selfish to love the self, it's self-kiss. So that aside, well, I think there's a healthy ego and an unhealthy ego. I think it's just to make it simple. The healthy ego is sturdy, self-loving, believes in its value, believes in your value, is connected to your soul's journey, is helping you to bring your soul's journey into reality. And there's, so it's like finding this point of balance. I call it Western consciousness, between the oceans of essence, that you're part of this unity field, let's say, and your individual droplet of meaning, which is who you are uniquely, idiosyncratically, and why you're here. And if we go too far in the direction of the oceans of essence, we're kind of floating away from the self like a spiritual bypasser. And if we go too far in the direction of everything's about me, my individual droplet of meaning, we start to enter this sort of narcissistic, unhealthily self-absorbed terrain. Like a very extreme version of that would be Donald Trump, the obvious version of that. So I think that a healthy self-concept is, I think of selfishness. People gaslight people with the word selfishness a lot when they're not being selfish. They're being healthily self-concepted. Calling people selfish is one of the ways of keeping them down. So when someone says that, or you're thinking that because you're conditioned to think that, ask yourself if it's healthily self-concepted, the healthy ego, or unhealthily self-concepted. So I think selfish ideally would be a word we use to describe someone who's unhealthily self-concepted, but that's not the way it's often used. It's often used as a weapon against against the building of the healthy self-concept. So that's we need to. The word's fine. I just think we need to refine the meaning of it.
Do you think it's often used by ourselves, that we say to ourselves we are selfish, or is it often?
Oh yeah, of course. Well, because we've been told that. I mean, when you're a little baby and or a little child and you're not sharing your food with your sibling or something, and they tell you you're selfish, then you get the message that if I want something for me, it's not good. But this is not nuanced enough to really help us to make sense. So what is a healthy sense of self? What's an unhealthy sense of self? This is a question that is fundamental to the questions around actualization, transformation, and the soul shaping journey. My experience has been, Ram Dass had this quote that you have to become something before you become nothing. So and then when you become nothing, you become everything. So that's sort of the bypassy part of it. But the first part of it I always liked, because I had to do all this stuff within myself, build my life, prove things to myself, work on myself. That kept me separate from the world. Somebody could have said, oh, Jeff Brown's being very selfish, but I didn't think that I was being selfish in an unhealthy way, because what happened for me is once I reached a stage of a degree of satisfaction within the self, my natural movement then was to bring an offering to the world. So if I had bought into the idea that all this work I was doing on myself while my family was in difficulty was selfish, I never would have reached the stage where I could bring this offering that's helpful to people into the world. So it's important that you make a distinction. Working on yourself is not selfish.
A healthy degree of self-love is healthy. And you need to know for yourself what you need to actually feel, not know, maybe feel for yourself. When is it really self-love? And when is it really selfish for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, I mean, as long as you're not so like sociopathic, then it's probably moving in a healthy self-love direction, taking care of the self. You have to honor the self, reach a stage of true self-love, be gratified enough within the self before you're giving over to the world is coming from the right place, as opposed to a sort of a people-pleasing place, somebody who never, ever allows themselves to be self-absorbed or self-centered. There are times to be self-absorbed and self-centered. We have a lot of work to do in the self to clean up this self. So we don't want to plague it with notions of selfishness. And I think, for the most part, if someone's coming from a sociopathic place, they're not going to be asking this question anyway. The fact that we're asking the question probably means we're doing something that we need to do within the self itself.
So on page 37 of Hearticulations back, you write, healing is not about them changing. It's about you changing. And my question about this is actually, even though we know this, actually, if some people are a little bit aware of themselves, we know it's not about them changing, it's about me changing. Why do we keep our attention to others and not ourselves? And where can we find the courage to truly look in ourselves? You already said, we need to be ready to just do the deep work, but why do we keep giving the attention to the outside world, to the manager, to the parent, to the ex-partner, to the friends?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. I think for me, we've just been so diminished as a self that we externalize our sense of our own value. Nobody taught us how to derive our own value from our experience of selfhood. So this is new terrain for most of us, really, I think. But that quote was really also about how people put their healing on hold, waiting for the, abusive parent to come over and make admission, or the partner to do the work because they don't want to leave the relationship. And instead of just growing within the self, they keep waiting on somebody else's admission, ownership of their actions, transformation, before they move forward. And I think this is a very, very big mistake. Because first of all, you have no idea if somebody wants to do the work. And usually if you push them to do it, they're not going to do it. But the other problem with it is, if they do the work, when they do the work, you don't know who they're going to become. They may not be somebody you're going to fit with anymore. They may not be somebody you can relate to. They may not be somebody who you want to sleep with anymore. They may become a different being. So really all you can do, for the most part, you can remain kind and open where possible with others, but just focus on your own process and transformation. I had this conversation with Ram Dass many years ago when he was alive. A relative of mine was in trouble, drugs and homelessness and all kinds of things. And I was tempted to stop writing my first book and go back and save him. This was my pattern. It's a family pattern. My grandmother said, take care of you, so I was like, okay. So I called Ram Dass, and Ram Dass had a similar experience because he had a homeless brother in New York. And he said, he quoted some Jesus quote, I can't remember, but the essence of it was, Jeff, the most you can do for all of us is to become the person you're meant to become. And that may mean that other person who you think you have to save doesn't get saved, but it may mean that you save 1 million people or 100 people, but even if you never save anybody, you save yourself by allowing yourself to become all that you're meant to become. And I think that's not selfish. That's self-kiss.
That's self-kiss and also kissing everyone, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be holding yourself back from a patterned place.
Mm-hmm.
Because these are patterns, these are notions of loyalty, survivalism, the apple never falls too far from the tree. We stick together for dear life, and we stay in the trenches together. Well, usually if somebody is going to evolve in a family, it's one person, usually only one. And if you're that person, you got to do it for you and for the world. And maybe it heals them back in time. Maybe those crazy survivalists whose shoulders you stand on wherever they are, if they're somewhere. I remember my grandmother used to say to me, she used to say, you're doing the work that we couldn't do. And she liked that I was doing the work that she couldn't do.
But how nice that
that's why she worked so hard. All that chicken soup. What was the point of the chicken soup if I was going to stay in the same fucking prison with them? Right?
I think it's very supportive that your grandmother said that you do the work that we could not do.
Yeah.
And I think also there will be many people
that don't hear that.
No, they are like, what are you doing? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Or just, I don't know, like have this stable job. Why are you not happy about this?
Yeah.
Just do this. You have enough money. You have a roof on your head. So just keep going, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay. About unconditional love, Jeff.
Okay.
Page 47. Unconditional love begins at home with the protecting and honoring of our own unique journey. So, what does unconditional love mean to you? Okay, I know where it begins regarding to your text. And how can we practice it? Really loving ourselves and others without any expectations. Can be.
Is there some reason we have to? Let's just talk about truth. I mean, what's the truth? I mean, if you can reach the stage where you really deeply unconditionally love yourself, that's rare and fantastic. And but do we have to? I mean, I think the point of that quote is, even if you believe in unconditional love, there's just somebody who you love and you will always love. You can also pray for them from outside the prison walls. So I'm not opposed to unconditional love, but I'm opposed to unconditional love as a justification for masochism and suffering. So love who you want. Just don't let them undermine your experience of unconditional self-love. This is just to me, this is the boundaried place to go. So I can say, I love you, but I'm not going to let you destroy me. And whatever you're caught in, whatever your patterns are, all the rest of that. I can think of a number of people that I feel tremendous love for, but that doesn't mean I want them so close to me.
So okay, I understand what you're saying.
It's like knowing where you end. Let's say knowing where your self-love begins and where the ends and the other begins, right? This is selective attachment. This is a very important part of the journey, because if you keep surrounding yourself with people that undermine your movement towards a life emblazoned with sacred purpose, then you haven't helped anybody.
So we talked about pain. We talked about self-love. We talked about unconditional love, and also a lot we talked about releasing things through the body, the emotions through the body. And you wrote also down, out with the old, in with the true. Yeah. Like if the listener says now, hey, this is really interesting, I would really like to work on this, I am ready, or I'm thinking about being ready, what kind of daily practices would you recommend if the listener says, hey, I'm not into therapist, or I don't want to do all these things, but I want to practice it myself?
So it depends what they're holding. But let's say they're holding anger, which I think most people are. Anger has been so vilified in the culture, but there's so much of it. They may have an anger release practice. For example, they might have a mattress, or like I have a foam cube or something, and tennis racket or a baseball bat, and they might, for example, photocopy pictures of people they're angry at and tape them to the mattress or cube, and they may just smash the shit out of it in order to move their anger. So that would be a practice. They may not like that. It might feel a little too edgy or too scary, or in their environment they can't do that. So maybe they'll write letters of anger that they may or may not ever mail, for example, to move their anger out of them. That's one possibility. Also, with respect to, say, grief or sadness that's inside of them that wants to move, they may explore and look around a little bit into bioenergetics, somatic experiencing, core energetics, find some practices that allow them to open the body to the material. Even using, in grounded spirituality, I talk about something that I keep wanting to develop but never get to. Maybe you can do it, called barking dog yoga, where you use the asanas to excavate the material you're holding and release it on the mat. I just think this is just a wonderful blend of East and West and Western wisdom. So you might want to do that on the mat and use that as a place to move that material on through, so that you're creating more space inside of you for living, breathing, and for good health, because obviously holding all this material is not good for our health, right?
Yeah, barking dog yoga.
Yeah, it's in grounded spirituality. I don't know. I can't remember if I sent that to you. But I think the yoga mat, and the problem is the patriarchal spiritual defining structures of yoga. In many ways, yoga was about perfecting the body and getting away from all this toxicity, because that's their little delusional mastery game. I'm the masterful yogi, even though my whole life is a shit show. So using the mat as an opportunity to get in touch. Often the asanas that we don't want to go near are actually the ones that are holding the most feeling. So to push ourselves a little on the mat, to use it as a chance to connect to the stuff and to release the stuff, and maybe putting on the music or the films or whatever. I mean, I used to watch this one film, Serendipity, all the time when I needed to cry, and it just worked for me, you know?
Yes. Yeah, actually, my one of my friends, which has also a Turkish background, she says, like, it helps me so much to watch the Turkish television drama series. And I was like, I don't like them. And there she's like, I love it because I keep crying when I watch it, and I am releasing so many emotion.
Nice. Yeah.
Okay, Jeff, before I'm going to ask my last question, before that, I want to ask the Kash part, going back to the start. How would you describe the Jeff before going Kash and after returning back from Kash? Like, what kind of transformation did you go through?
It was really something, we had landed in Turkey, in Istanbul, and then we were flying to the coast. And I didn't know back then with Turkish Air that you had to point at your luggage for them to put the luggage on the plane. I didn't know that. So we arrived somewhere and I didn't have anything except the clothes I was wearing. And I felt very uncomfortable. So I went and bought it wasn't Lululemon. I can't remember the company, but all of these like tight little clothes. And it was just whatever I could get. And I felt like it was like a portal to my experiencing myself without my identifications, right? Now I was wearing weird clothes and weird underwear and weird shoes and all kinds of stuff. And then we pulled into Kosh and I was already feeling, I always wanted to go home. I was like, I wanted to go home to like get my identity back. But there was something about this place. So when the bus came in, it was coming down into Kosh, and then when I got there, we went on this like boat ride thing. You just hung out and had lunch and whatever, and you went to the beach. And
you go to Kekoa.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, actually. Yeah, right. And it was the craziest thing. It was like I was looking out over the ocean. It was like it was my first. I think it was my first experience of what I might call past lives access. I didn't know how to make sense of it, but I felt like I saw myself in another incarnation form on that ocean, like a warrior on the ocean. I had all of these really, really profound experiences of something vaster, of a Jeff that existed before, whatever his name may have been or her name may have been. So when I left, so this was what's interesting. So I parted from my friends. Then I went to Greece with my funny clothes. Then I arrived at Toronto Airport at the end of my trip, coming back to do the bar admission program in Toronto. One of the women who I had disconnected from and who had gone to Israel was at the airport. Her flight was landing around the same time. She was a friend of mine. And now she had my bag. Somehow they'd figured out my connection to her, sent it to Jerusalem, and she flew back with my bag. So it was like, and I didn't think like this. But then I developed this term UBS, and Soul Shaping, the Universal Broadcasting System. It was this feeling of like, okay, so I'm going to have this great adventure before I come back and become a prominent trial lawyer. And now all of a sudden, my bag's gone. I have to experience myself in a whole new and different way. Then I have these in that open place of Kosh too, this vaster experience of another Jeff or something. And then once I have this experience in me, and I get it now, like there's so much more to this life than my identifications. That was the point. Then the universe decides to give me back my clothes because the mission was accomplished. That was how I felt. And I never had an experience like this before. So then when I went back into the bar and mission course now, because we had done one before articling and now after articling, I had 3 months, everything looked different. It was like I had nestled into this vaster terrain in my consciousness because of Turkey. And that's quite apart from the amazing and positive effect that all that creme caramel had on me. That's a whole different story.
So, Jeff, where can people find you?
Usually up at Tim Hortons getting a double-double.
But if they are listening from Amsterdam or Europe, other parts of Europe.
And they don't want to fly to Timmy's, jeffbrown.co, jeffbrown.co.
Okay, Jeff.
I'm on Facebook. I got some Facebook stuff in my name, and I'm on Instagram too.
Yeah,
and the links are off my site.
Yeah, I will put everything in the episode notes so people can find you on Instagram, Facebook, and your website. And then I go
soulshaping and soulshapinginstitute.com. That's the other
soulshapinginstitute.com. Okay. Yes. And the last question, the Bridging podcast is about taking the listener on a bridge, sometimes to a familiar place, sometimes to a new place. And I'm sure that some people went today to a familiar place, new places. But if you could take them on a bridge, where would that be? It might be a physical place, or it might be also a place in imagination.
I love that you called the Bridging podcast. Because I think so much lately about the bridge. I would take them, walk beside them slowly, carefully on a bridge from the survivalist self to the authentic self. Because I think that's the bridge that we're on as individuals and as a collective. I think it's the bridge crossing we need. I think it's the most important bridge crossing of all. And we would do it in a way that incorporates, in a very grounded way, the need to survive, so that we're holding all of these things, what I call enrealment, in our consciousness at one time, rather than being either or, black or white in our movement. So that we take what we've learned about how to survive in the world and we bring it with us across the bridge. And now we connect with and incorporate the authentic self, so that we're here on every level, here for what we're born to become. We know how to survive in the world, and we know the difference between our armored self and our authentic self, and we can make conscious choices.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jeff.
You're welcome.
This is amazing. I appreciate your contribution. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Hearticulations.
I feel